What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If. If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my third channel, so if you want some more what ifs, go check out my other channels. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. Fire. There was nothing but fire. Flames flickered and danced. Flames jumped and pranced. Naruto was in fear. Nothing was going as planned. Sasuke was hurled away like a rag doll by the woman they were trying to defeat. She was a monster, a complete horrid monster compared to all the other enemies they'd faced. Obito was tough. Madara was another level, but Kaguya was a monster. She tossed them around like children and even punched through Kakashi's Susanoo like it was paper. She glared at Naruto, her Sharingan Rinnegan hybrid blaring a vivid color. Veins tightened and grew on her temples as the Byakugan came to life. This fight was something else entirely. He hasn't been able to land a single hit on the woman. He phased through her every time he thought he was about to land an attack. Sasuke would phase through her every time his attack would almost meet its mark. This was infuriating, and now she had the upper hand. Sakura was dead. Kakashi was dead. Everyone was dead. Naruto slammed his forehead against the ground, feeling the heat of his tears trickle down his burned skin. He was in pain, unfathomable pain. Sasuke was struggling to push himself off the ground. The fires wouldn't stop raging around them. Sasuke wobbled to his feet, his chakra burning around him as his Susanoo sprang to life, dark as night with wings spread for all to see. He wasn't about to let his plans fail because he couldn't beat this woman. His Sharingan Rinnegan combination sprang to life, as did his Susanoo. Naruto was still on the ground struggling against this enemy. The Susanoo rushed through the air, ramming Kaguya, catching her off guard. She growled at him though and channeled her infinite chakra to her palm, slamming her hand against the face of the Susanoo. Sasuke froze in midair before shooting off towards the ground. Once again he crashed through the cracked earth, shattering the terrain around him. Naruto called out his name, but a large boulder fell over, crushing his legs, keeping him in place. The golden blonde gritted his teeth and clenched the earth below. He wasn't about to scream. All around he could already see the destruction of his home, his world. Everywhere the flames engulfed everything. His joy, his happiness, the good Adama that surrounded him shot out and defended his crippled body. Blood coursed from his mouth, trickling onto the rocky ground below, splashing softly. Naruto's palms rested against the rough ground. In regret he could hear Sasuke fighting Kaguya again, only to hear him get tossed around once again. He could hear her laughing, he could hear her punches and her kicks. The ground shook every time Sasuke hit the ground. It was making him uncomfortable. He pushed hard against the ground, trying his best to escape from the prison the boulders had him, and he sighed and channeled his chakra to his legs, shooting them in all directions, freeing his legs from their weight. He groaned though when he realized that he couldn't feel his legs. They looked like powder. He bent down, placing his right hand on the shattered bone and shut his eyes, channeling his own chakra on himself. The energy flowed within, taking a piece of him and reforming what was lost. Once he was done though, Naruto felt a thick warm trail of blood fall from his nose. He shot his hand to his face, surprised by the amount of blood. It was no matter right now. What did matter though? Beating Kaguya and saving the world. Naruto rushed forward, feeling in his legs back to normal. He stumbled for a bit, but he was managing it. Wasn't long before he ran full speed ahead with power radiating within his body. He jumped over a few boulders and made a full-length leap over the ocean of lava below. He floated softly and took to the air just like he did before she plucked him from the sky. Two good Adama extended into small staffs as he closed the distance between him and the raging goddess. He swung for her neck, but the woman weaved between his attack and rammed her foot into his gut. He of course disappeared into a puff of smoke. Kaguya glared and brought her elbow back with lightning fast speeds, ready to take the blonde out of the sky. He dodged at the last second, bringing his staff back around, slamming the good Adama against her shoulder. She groaned and rammed her fist into Naruto's face, shooting him away, only for him to return like a persistent fly behind her. Sasuke rammed his Susanoo fist into her back, sending her towards Naruto at lightning fast speeds. The two boys looked at one another with knowing looks and rushed forward. Sasuke had his left arm exploding with a black Chidori, while Naruto rushed ahead with his Rasengan glowing with wind chakra and sage chakra. They were about to close the distance with Kaguya, but she quickly phased through the dimension, leaving Naruto and Sasuke on a path towards one another. The Uchiha activated his Rinnegan, disappearing as soon as possible. They too glared at one another, but were ultimately aggravated with their opponent. She was too elusive and knew their strengths, but better yet knew their weaknesses. She was fast and smart with the way she handled the two of them. She'd learned from her fight with her sons and was intending to defeat their reincarnations. She was intending to defeat Indra and Ashura once and for all. She returned to the dimension with a darker look and a darker intent. She threw up her hands, shooting large spikes from her sleeves to the two unsuspecting boys. The first volley was deflected by the thick armor of Sasuke's Susanoo, but the rest made It passed him and a few even dug into his body. She turned her gaze to the flying ball of gold and before long she channeled her chakra for another attack. Spikes sped forward aiming right for Naruto's chest, but what she didn't expect, Sasuke shot back up, this time taking the brunt of the attacks. Behind the massive darkness of his Susanoo, Naruto was in shock of what he saw. Sasuke took the hit. Images of wave flashed in his mind. The blonde's body ran cold as anger took over him. Sasuke though jumped up, still in Susanoo, and sped through hand seals, firing off fire ninjutsu as fast as he could, trying to catch Kaguya off guard. Sasuke looked to Naruto almost as if he was begging him to join him. Sasuke was crying in front of Naruto. At that the blonde shook his head from his stupor and rushed forward, standing next to his best friend while forming a Rasen Shuriken. The two gave each other quick glances. Naruto could easily see that there were at least 5 large spikes impaled into Sasuke's chest. Sasuke coughed blood but had his Chidori spring to life. He was glaring with a newfound intensity as the tears dried up. Naruto could tell that Sasuke was dying, but before Naruto could do anything to help the Uchiha, another nosebleed happened. Blood cascaded down his lip and drenched his neck and collar. He nearly broke the concentration for his Rasen Shuriken, but before long it was completed and Kaguya was still recuperating and building her chakra for her next attack. We can't delay any longer, Sasuke. Naruto roared. Then come on. Sasuke roared back. Naruto hurled his Rasen Shuriken along with 2 more from his shadow clones. Kaguya watched in wait. Since Sasuke didn't move, she narrowed her eyes at the 2 boys and wondered what they were planning. She dodged the first 2 Rasen Shuriken and smirked as they exploding behind her a bit too close, but the third was coming straight for her. She bent back as the Rasen Shuriken zoomed above her and exploded as well. She was about to start laughing but realized that Naruto was nowhere to be found. She turned around to see the boy already coming in close with chakra exploding off of his hands. Her head turned back around to see Sasuke already touching his palm with her shoulder. With a quick movement, Kaguya shot her arms together, shooting out 2 blades, impaling the 2 boys. Their hands were still outstretched. Blood coursed down the blades and cascaded down their backs as the blades exited through their spines. Naruto and Sasuke coughed out blood, nearly feeling the effects of her sudden attack. Naruto grunted softly, clenching his teeth. Sasuke did the same, the 2 of them digging the blades deeper into their bodies. Sasuke grabbed her collar with his right hand and Naruto grabbed her collar with his left, bringing their dominant hands out. Kaguya realized that they'd caught her. Take this bitch, Naruto howled. The 2 boys rammed their palms into her shoulders. Chakra exploded in all directions. The ground began to crack and shake. Earth shot up and began to build around her. She felt the jutsu build around her, filling her with an all-familiar dread. She released the blades from her grasp and the 2 reincarnations fell from the air. Chakra spent and strength lost. This jutsu was unstoppable and Kaguya feared that it was over. She defeated the Uchiha, but Naruto was still waiting to die. She rose into the air, flying up into sky, and started to lose sight of that damned Uzumaki. With a quick thought, a clone appeared a few meters below, safe from the Chibaku Tensei. She smirked as the rocks and boulders wrapped around her below. Naruto dragged his wounded body over to the dead Uchiha. Blood pooled around his body. The blonde looked back to see a large trail of his own blood following after his own body. The boy winced as the blade dragged against the rocks and earth below, digging the blade deeper into his body. His muscles clenched tightly as the blade went halfway through. Blood sprayed from his mouth and spattered onto the ground, splashing softly. He pulled his body with the last remaining strength he can muster. Sasuke was dead. His eyes were lifeless. Naruto looked at the man he called his brother and felt the tears sting. There was nothing he could do now. He was on the verge of death, and he was already running low on his near unlimited chakra. Naruto collapsed onto the ground as the new moon rose up into the sky. Kaguya was sealed once again and they'd won, but he was suddenly kicked over onto his back by a very angry person. The blade slid out of his chest, eliciting a scream from the wounded blonde. He stared at his assailant with exhausted eyes. It was Kaguya. His body was covered in a cold sweat. He struggled to move his arms to fight back, but the woman placed her feet onto his wrists, cutting the circulation. She dug her foot into the bones, bringing more screams from the boy. You think you saved this world? Kaguya asked. Think again. She sped through a few hand seals faster than Naruto had ever seen. She glared at him as his eyes made a skin-freezing connection with the Sharingan Rinnegan hybrid in her forehead. She smirked wildly as the energy spiraled within Naruto, building in his body, almost making him explode. But before she knew it, he was gone. All that was left was the corpse of the Uchiha in the collapsing dimension they'd fought, and she smirked at her job and dispelled, leaving the earth to its own devices. Elsewhere, centuries later, Pusher Grace the handmaiden cried out. The castle bells tolled, bringing life to King's Landing, or rather annoying that life away. People looked in annoyance towards the Red Keep, the imposing castle of the Targaryen kings. Since Aegon the Conqueror first stepped foot in Westeros, the Westerosi people of King's Landing dreaded these bells. Once they rang from dusk till dawn, almost a year prior, but now these bells seemed louder, and whoever was chosen to ring the bells seemed to love his job. People walked across the cobblestone streets trying their best to escape the echoing noise, but of course no one stated their discomfort. No one dared to. Everywhere gold cloaks and soldiers of the crownlands ran about doing their best to keep the order. Already the bells had rung since well into the early morn, and now it was a few hours past midday. Some had to admit, though, this bell tolling was starting to get annoying. Over and over they rang, echoing into their ears, digging into their eardrums. They fought through it though, and made sure that no one would get into the castle without proper identification. The queen was giving birth, which meant that there could be people coming to kill her newborn, but instead of would-be assassins, a different kind of killer arrived from the back of his high horse. A powerful man arrived with a smirk on his face. His hair was black and his eyes were a powerful sapphire blue. He was strong, muscled, and carried a spear and warhammer on his broad back. How he carried both had many in awe. This was their king for a reason. After all, Robert Baratheon arrived after hearing the news of his wife being in labor. Behind him, Jaime Lannister, the twin brother to the queen, and Barristan Selmy dismounted their horses and followed after their king. Their armor and chainmail shivered together, ringing over and over, mixing with tolling bells above. They walked with a hurried pace, following after their overexcited king. It was understandable, of course. Selmy could only imagine how the king felt, but Jaime thought otherwise. Jaime was ecstatic to see his new child. Jaime was sure it was his. There was no way that Cersei would allow the disgrace that King Robert was impregnate her with his seed. Jaime tried his best to keep his steps from flying him forward. The birth of his child was something he'd been wanting to be present for since he'd missed the birth of Joffrey. He followed close behind Robert as the man tried his best to rein in his breaths. They stopped in one of the halls and felt their blood run cold when her wails could be heard. She was in pain and could be heard screaming with a pitch none had ever heard before. Jaime and Robert took off towards the sound. Jaime, of course, getting ahead of the muscled king. Jaime pushed through the army of handmaidens and practically burst through the doors with sweat pouring down his brow. He looked left and right and felt his smile grow. When Cersei was seen clasping yet another blonde-haired baby boy in her arms, Jaime smirked softly and found that the child was his after all, but that smile dropped when he locked eyes with the newborn. Those eyes weren't green like his. Those eyes were different, like sapphire. This wasn't his child, this was Robert's legitimate heir. Cersei. Jaime smiled, but was pushed out of the way by the imposing king and his monstrous size. Gods, Robert looked at his child, completely seeing past the blonde hair. He is my eyes, Cersei. Robert's breaths were suddenly calmed and reserved. He was no longer running on adrenaline and rage. He was surprised by his child and knelt down next to his wife as queen. The two of them sat in silence and stared at their child with nothing but love. Jaime was pulled from the room by Barristan and forced to stand guard of the room. Cersei felt something in chest when she stared at the little baby in her arms. There was something powerful within him. Everyone could feel it. Robert looked to her and gave her a small smile while rubbing his finger against the little baby's chubby cheek. Do you have a name for him yet? Robert asked softly, eyes never once leaving the little baby in Cersei's arms. I do. Cersei smiled softly. She was about to say some normal Westerosi name, but there was something growing in her gut that told her otherwise. This voice spoke to her, echoed in the depths of her soul. In everything that was within her, her mind pounded, and soon enough heat rose to her face as she thought harder and harder at what she'd been told. Was it the gods she'd asked? But she decided to answer her king. After a few minutes of silence, she locked her green eyes with Robert's sapphire blue. I'll name him Naruto. His name will be Naruto Baratheon. Time skip. Naruto awoke in a rather comfortable setting. His linens were warm and wrapped tightly around his small body. Being a child of only 8 years made him realize how fragile he really was. It was early in the morning and the cool winds of Blackwater Bay started to flow into his chambers. Already the gulls of Narrow Sea were already gawking, fishing through the waters for the early morning catch. Not much activity was in the city at this time, so Naruto didn't really hear anything past the gulls running a hand through his unruly blonde hair, which he deigned from ever brushing. Naruto rushed from the bed and headed towards the bath, intending to get a warm wash down before heading out for breakfast. His stomach churned and growled menacingly, almost as if it was threatening him if he didn't eat any time soon. With a sigh, the boy decided against taking a bath. His mother would be appalled. He headed over towards his dresser and threw on a simple tunic and slipped into a pair of breeches looking eerily akin to a peasant. Naruto smirked and slipped his feet into a pair of soft-skin leather boots and headed out for something to eat. Bells tolled, signifying the arrival of midday. Freezing Naruto in his steps, he turned frantically, surprised at how long he'd taken to actually change. It was no matter, though. He finally surmised that only meant that the stores and the market would be open for all. He walked calmly, avoiding gold cloaks and knights of the Kingsguard. The halls were grand in the Red Keep, and they wound around like a never-ending maze. Sometimes it annoyed him to no end, other times it was A breath of fresh air, especially when he'd try to escape from the ever-creepy Grand Maester Pycelle. He never did like the wrinkly-bearded old man. Naruto kept walking and slid past the different people and handmaidens walking about the halls of the castle. He came to a halt when he laid eyes on the banner of the king. One half was bearing the sigil of House Baratheon, a crowned stag on a field of yellow, and the other half bearing the sigil of House Lannister, a golden lion on a field of red too. Naruto, though, if he was going to be completely honest with those around him, he'd prefer to have a hybrid of the stag and the lion over a field of orange. Orange always was his favorite color. Best of both parts of his family. It seemed the sound of shivering chainmail and armor echoed behind him. He turned to see two Kingsguard knights walking down his hall. Naruto ran up against the wall and pressed his back against it, doing his best to keep quiet while knowing his father wouldn't do a thing to stop him from having fun in the city. His mother was a different story, always telling him of the vile things people do to one another in the city, always filling his head with these stories, which only solidified his reasoning to go into the city in the first place. With the two knights out of sight, the boy sped past them with near silence and slid his feet against the polished granite floors of the Red Keep. He was silent and quick. The blonde was about to make it to the door until he felt a hand wrap around the collar of his tunic, pulling him back. He struggled against whomever it was, but to no avail. Naruto sighed in despair and turned to face his warden, Joffrey. Naruto frowned. "What are you doing up so early?" "I was about to ask you the same thing," Joff replied with a glare. "Mother wants to know where you are now." "Here, I was thinking you'd caught me by surprise," Naruto replied with a cheeky smirk. "Mother had me wake you." Joffrey frowned deeper. "When I came to your chambers you weren't there. Now where else would a freak like you be other than trying to sneak into the city?" Now big brother," Naruto smirked. "There's no need to be an ass about it. Come on." "Damn you," Joffrey sighed, pulling his 8-year-old brother along. "But the city is right there," Naruto pleaded. "Then beg mother to let you go," Joffrey replied with a tone that spoke no argument. The two smiled at each other, but then burst into laughter. The elder of the two released Naruto, and they walked side by side, laughing with one another. Moments like these made Naruto realize that having a brother older than him wasn't too bad, even if they were as annoying as Joffrey. They laughed amongst each other, getting the attention and looks from many of the peasantry, and handmaidens walking about. Gold cloaks and Kingsguard gave the two princes nods of respect, but suddenly the two boys were shut quiet as the image of a fat black cat rushed through the hall. Both boys watched it with curiosity intensifying. Naruto gave Joffrey a look, and Joff shared the sentiment. They smiled softly and took off with lightning speeds through the grand hall, rushing past handmaidens and serfs coming in to speak with their father, the king. This cat was all they wanted to catch, and they didn't care who got in their way. "Hey, when do you think father will take us out to hunt with him?" Naruto asked as they rounded one of the halls. "No idea, Naruto." Joffrey frowned. "Maybe someday when we're old enough." Oh, Naruto frowned as well. Naruto knows what his father does. He always goes on hunts, and when he leaves he's always out on 2 hunts, one for wildlife and the other for whores. Naruto felt a little sick to his stomach thinking of the things his father does when he's not sitting on the Iron Throne. It was at this moment when he realized that he was starving and that he hasn't had a bite to eat yet. He looked to see Joffrey running with a determined look on his face. This cat must be very important to him. They followed the cat and cornered it in the kitchen. Joffrey rushed at the cat and tackled the animal against one of the counters. The cooks and kitchen maidens screamed and ran out of the kitchen, not wanting to be the target of the queen or the king's wrath. Joffrey, though, picked the cat up by its tail and placed it down onto a cutting board. "Joffrey," Naruto shouted in surprise. "What in 7 hells are you doing?" "You wanted to hunt?" Joffrey asked with a malicious glare spread across his face. "We're hunting." He pulled a knife from one of the knife holders and slid the sharp blade against the underbelly of the squealing cat. Naruto winced as the cat fought back against Joffrey, scratching and fighting back to the best of its abilities, but to no avail. The boy dug the knife deeper and deeper, cutting the skin and flesh clean from the cat's tiny body. Joff rammed his hand into the slit he created, fishing around in the belly of the now dead feline. Naruto couldn't stomach looking at it. He turned on his heels and began to walk away, finding his appetite had disappeared completely. All he could hear at this point was Joffrey's incessant laughter, and Naruto could have sworn that the boy said something about making their father proud. Naruto walked away, trying to forget the heinous scene he'd just witnessed. He needed to get out of the castle soon and take a dip into the shimmering waves of Blackwater Bay. The boy walked with a slight drag to his steps. This day had just begun for him, and he'd already felt like he'd been awake for hours. He walked past the guards and gave each one a quick nod before heading to the nice area of Blackwater Bay section off for the royal family. He knew his mother would probably say something about him going out there without guards, but Naruto knew he could take good care of himself. Tossing his tunic away and laying it against a post, the boy removed his boots and jumped headfirst into the water. With nothing but a soft, near-silent splash in his wake, he dove through the water, pushing the waves out of his way. The pressure pushing against his mind and against his body, easing his muscles, easing his thoughts, feeling his breath run dry. He surfaced gasping out and waded out further into the bay. His blonde locks stuck to his forehead and flittered down, covering his eyes from view. The water was salty and tasted like shit. Naruto spit out and wiped his face, trying to get a good feel of where he was. The Red Keep was still in view, and the pier was well within swimming distance. He stayed where he was, though feeling a small deep dread within his heart raced when he realized that his mother hadn't come rushing out to find him. He swam quickly towards the pier and dried himself off as fast as possible and threw his tunic around his torso. All with the same quick motion, he completely forgot his boots and sped into the Red Keep, running over the stones protruding from the sand and even running onto Dornish carpets covering the expensive textiles with wet globs. But the carpets ran thin and Naruto was running wet footed on polished granite. Servants and handmaidens watched with horror as the prince rushed through the grand hall, splashing his feet against the smooth tiled surface. He froze in his steps, sliding slightly. His mother was running towards the opposite end of keep. Her entourage of handmaidens were following close behind her. Naruto didn't know what was happening but charged off after her, forgetting that the incoming turn was a hard left. His feet lost traction, and he slipped. Naruto crashed into the tile floor, banging his head against the hard granite. Naruto groaned softly and felt a bit of blood trickle down the side of his head, but it was nothing. The boy disregarded the helpful hands from the servants and handmaidens and took off with amazing speed after his mother. He rounded the corner and entered the throne room, only to see Robert standing with a distraught look on his face and with Joffrey sitting on the floor. Blood coursed from his mouth, and there seemed to be two little teeth laying at Joffrey's knees. Cersei was appalled by what she was seeing, but what made her sick to the stomach was the little feline fetus lying next to Joffrey, still fresh and bloody. Robert glared at Joffrey, then glared at Cersei. Naruto, the king roared. His voice echoed throughout the throne room. The boy in question jumped at his father's declaration and sped forward with a timid aura about him. Naruto walked slowly, trying his best to avoid his father's, his mother's, and his own brother's gaze. Robert had his knuckles clenched and his face was a fiery inferno of vermilion. Cersei was just as angry, but for some reason Naruto could have sworn that it wasn't aimed at the perpetrator. Joff, though, gave Naruto a pleading look, one that begged him not to say anything. Explain to me what Joffrey has done, Robert shouted, sending shivers down Naruto's spine. I want to know your side of the story. Naruto froze. His Baratheon blue eyes widened with fear. They trailed over to Joffrey, and he immediately realized what his brother was begging him for. Naruto was suddenly grabbed by the strong hand of Robert Baratheon and forced to lock eyes. The two of them stared at each other for what seemed to be a lifetime. Naruto's heart pounded with fear, shutting his eyes to avoid the powerful gaze his father was boring into him, but with a sigh he decided to spill the truth. Joffrey's face dropped with fear as Robert trudged towards his eldest son. Naruto winced when the hits started coming. The impacts echoed through the throne room and Cersei's tears and sniffles could be heard behind him. Naruto was frozen in place and made sure not to face either of them. He couldn't face them, but when Naruto couldn't think it could get any worse, Robert turned to him with a glare equaling the ones he was giving Cersei and Joffrey. Get out, Naruto, Robert said sternly. I don't want you entering this throne room until I tell you otherwise, and tell my stupid squire to come in and get me wine. Naruto hurried away like a spooked mouse. Joffrey was bruised and bleeding profusely, but his glare was the only thing he could manage to make out before he rushed from the throne room. Naruto stumbled, realizing that he'd gotten Joffrey's blood on his bare feet, and slipped once more, crashing into a cloud of white. Hey, what's going? Sorry, Uncle Jamie. Naruto bowed in fear. Father wants someone to bring him wine. Naruto sped off as quickly as possible. He didn't want any more glares, any more stares. All he wanted at this point was to go to sleep. Already this day was too much, but of course things only got worse. He froze when he distinctly heard his mother's cries and screams. What have I done? Naruto laid still, shirtless, leaving his torso bare. His eyes stayed glued to the marks he'd made to his canopy. There was no other person that could have done it but him. He was confused, though these dents fit his fists perfectly, but that would have to mean that he'd dented pure gold. He couldn't believe that he could do something like that in his sleep. Of course, though, he was dreaming that he was fighting someone. Over and over that dream replayed. He was fighting someone, and every time it would seem that he was about to win, he'd wake up and find that he was on the floor or upside down on his bed. He couldn't fathom it, and once he even decided to ask Grand Maester Pycelle for his own opinion on the matter, only to find him consorting with whores from a pleasure house. The Baratheon had never felt so disgusted before. He couldn't even confide with Joffrey and ask for his help ever since the incident with Joffrey tearing open the pregnant cat. Joff didn't talk to him anymore, ignoring Naruto every chance he got, but now, since Tom and fifth name day had passed, Joffrey decided to torment their little brother. Naruto couldn't stand it, but what angered him even more, his mother defended Joff and his father simply said that Joffrey was trying to toughen Tommen up to make him a stronger, more resilient man. Naruto, of course, couldn't see the Justification: Robert clearly cared little for Tommen or his youngest daughter Marcella, as shown by how he never tried to defend his children or even try to scold Joff. Naruto clenched his fists and laid his head against his pillow with a glare tightening. His father was a fat drunk that didn't care about his children or his wife. His mother loved to chide and goad on Joffrey, pampering him like a three-course meal. If anyone was normal in this little family of his, Marcella and Tommen were the normal ones. Suddenly the door of his room burst open to reveal a maester, thankfully not the Grand Maester. Naruto didn't recognize this man, but he was led in by someone close to him. Naruto's eyes trailed across to see his ever-caring uncle. Jaime the Kingsguard Knight entered after the maester with a small smirk on his face and leaned against the doorframe. "You know, nephew, that cut you received on your head should be watched over," Jaime said, his smirk dropping. "I don't know what you're talking about, uncle." Naruto trailed his eyes away as the maester carefully forced his head over. One of the silent sisters carrying the ointments and medical supplies walked over to the maester and slowly pulled the different objects from her box. That fall shirted a number on Naruto's skull, having cracked a few parts of it and bruised badly. It was a surprise that the boy had survived this long without falling into a dreamless sleep. The maester was astounded with Naruto's resilience to the pain, though, and continued wiping the cleaning ointment over the wound. How people didn't notice the cut was beyond the maester. Naruto's cut, though, went unsanitized and unaccounted for over 3 years. The maester was completely appalled by the apparent length and nearly slapped Naruto for avoiding a maester's help. Naruto, of course, didn't even realize that it was that bad. It didn't swell, and it didn't even bleed that bad. The maester, though, had another diagnosis. Naruto's fall had caused a few fractures, making the skin push into his head, along with the cut itself splitting open to reveal a small part of his skull. The maester once again was amazed by Naruto's resilience to this pain, much less his ability to not bleed to death. Naruto stayed silent and let the maester do his work, continuing to spread the cleansing ointment over the wounded area. Naruto's eyes trailed up to his uncle with a blank look. Jaime was obviously examining him like he always did, always giving him a calculating look. Naruto was used to it, but this time Jaime's stares were actually getting to him. "Uncle, what is it?" Naruto asked with a raised brow. "How in seven hells did you manage to keep a wound hidden for 3 years?" Jaime asked, finally feeling his curiosity peak. "Nearly," Naruto corrected, "and well, nobody asked about it, so I didn't tell. If you injure yourself you should tell someone," Jaime said with an incredulous look on his face. "Does it really matter?" Naruto asked with a raised brow. "I mean, I'm fine, as you can see." "That's not the point, Naruto." Jaime shook his head with an exasperated sigh. "You were hurt, and you should have told someone, so you expect me to run off to the maester every time I stub my toe?" Naruto asked, his turn to have the incredulous look. "Do I look like Joffrey to you?" The two blondes shared a laugh, but the maester quickly shut them silent, telling them he needed to concentrate. Both Naruto and Jaime gave the maester quick glances before rolling their eyes, green and blue in perfect sync. Naruto stayed quiet and Jaime stayed at the door, and maester continued what he was doing, but for some strange reason Naruto couldn't feel what that was. "Maester, what are you doing exactly?" Naruto asked. "What do you mean?" the maester asked with a dropped jaw. "Can't you feel it?" "No." Naruto asked. "Am I supposed to?" "Of course you are," the maester said with a blank look on his face. "I'm old, but I distinctly remember not giving you the milk of the poppy." "Of course you didn't." Naruto laughed. Jaime's green eyes narrowed at Naruto. Naruto was always the different one among the children. Naruto was always strange, but this was on a different level. The needles the maester were using would be enough to scare children Naruto's age 3 times over. Not only that, but the maester was stitching Naruto's wound closed, and the wound wasn't as small as they'd originally thought. If anything, it was twice as large as they'd originally believed it to be. "How did I miss his wound for this long?" Jaime chided himself. "Naruto's been wounded for 3 years and I just found out about it a week ago. Oh, how I'd love to learn to hide pain and wounds that well." "I'm finished." The maester sighed in relief and stood from his seat, wiping his hands on a clean moist towel. The silent sisters bowed their heads respectfully to both Naruto and Jaime before filing from the room. Jaime looked out the window wondering the weather, but he could hear his name getting roared from down the hall. Jaime of course ignored it, thinking that voice belonged to some squire, but whoever was calling him really wanted him. Jaime didn't recognize the voice, so he still wasn't going to acknowledge the source of the voice, but after a few minutes of silence his voice sounded. It was a gruff voice, a voice filled with pompous self-righteous bigotry. "Kingslayer." The king's voice echoed down the hall. "Where are you, Kingslayer?" Naruto's eyes widened in fear and complete disgust when the king's voice echoed into his room. The prince's smile dropped to a simple frown. Jaime took a deep breath and walked over to his nephew, giving him a small pat on the shoulder, and headed out to save Naruto. Some shame. The Kingsguard Knight arrived from Naruto's room and met the bumbling king, who'd clearly stuffed his face before coming to get him. Jaime of course showed no sign of emotion and simply let Robert spill whatever it was he wanted to say. Naruto walked from the castle ready to take a quick dip into the warm waters of Blackwater Bay. He was whistling the song of House Lannister, The Reigns of Castamere, and if he was going to be honest, he was so close to singing it out loud, but of course the boy didn't really know how to sing, finding fighting and kicking ass more of his forte. If Joffrey wasn't such a shit, Naruto felt that Joff would be a better singer than being a prince. Maybe the fool should give up his title and hand it over to someone who wants it like me. Naruto smirked, and headed over to the beach to find Myrcella and Tommen. Already playing their septa, was sitting on the side with a watchful eye along the rocks and steps leading up the Red Keep. Lannister men-at-arms and Baratheon men-at-arms stood, the Lannister red flowing along the coast while the Baratheon yellow and orange stayed along the keep. They nodded their heads at him, both Baratheon and Lannister, leaving him with little to worry about. He hopped off a few of the rocks and barrel rolled over, landing next to his favorite siblings. Tommen and Myrcella burst into soft laughter, cheering at their elder brother. Their green eyes shimmered with adoration the longer they stared at Naruto. He of course simply ran a hand through his hair, forgetting about the stitching he'd just gotten done. Tommen and Myrcella of course noticed and gasped in fear. They pointed and asked questions, but Naruto simply said that they were too young to remember the incident. They were of course only 5 and 6 respectively. Naruto smiled when they dropped the question, returning to what they were doing in the first place. The elder brother watched them play with the sand, taking water from the bay and mixing it together to make solid shapes. A small smile grew on his face when he realized that the two children were trying to build the Red Keep out of sand. The detail was missing, but what would one expect from children? Naruto smirked and reached forward, helping his little siblings in whatever way he can, but just as time seemed to be as peaceful as ever, the darkness had to arrive and ruin it all. Their castle was kicked apart by none other than their annoying eldest brother Joffrey. He had a scowl on his face, and behind him Sandor the Hound Clegane stood like the watchdog he was purported to be. Sandor watched with a blank expression on his face, not caring in the slightest since he was the little shit's sworn shield. Joffrey continued stomping his feet through the sand castle, all the while belittling both Tommen and Myrcella, but he turned his eyes to face Naruto and saved his best insults for him. If Naruto were any other person, those insults would have wounded him, and under those circumstances would have made him burst into tears, but for some strange reason he wasn't affected. He stared at Joffrey with a glare marring his face. His blue eyes glowered with a shimmering hatred deep within. Naruto shot up with his fist and smacked Joffrey across the face, sending him into the water of the bay with a great splash. Myrcella and Tommen broke out into cheers, but Joffrey broke through the waters with an appalled look on his face and pointed at Naruto with an aghast expression. He screamed incoherently, somehow finding it hard to piece his parts of speech together. The Hound, though, understood the prince perfectly and headed over to Tommen and Myrcella. The large man picked the two up by the scruff of their collars, bringing them to tears and fits of fearful screams. Naruto looked at Joffrey to see him with a victorious smirk spread across his face, but Naruto knew better. This was to spite them in him. This was just something for him to channel his anger. Well, Naruto felt that two could play this game and ran up to the Hound, kicking the large man's knee. Sandor released his grip of Tommen and Myrcella, but he was quickly replied with the backhand of Sandor Clegane. Naruto took air and flew into one of the wooden beams of the pier, smashing his head against it once more. Joffrey waded from the water and congratulated the Hound for his work, and for once called him by his name. Tommen and Myrcella were about to run back to Naruto, but the giant of a man stood watch, blocking their elder brother from view. What the two attackers didn't realize, Naruto was starting to move already. His cut had torn right open and blood was coursing down the side of his head and his forehead. The Hound stared at Naruto for a moment and felt his body freeze. Naruto's arms and legs were covered in a strange blue fire, almost like an aura, and for some strange reason Joffrey couldn't see it. Naruto rushed forward and shot his fist forward, digging it into the stunned Clegane's plate armor. Joffrey was about to laugh, finding his brother's attack futile, but was quickly denied the satisfaction. The plate dented the sand beneath them, and it wasn't long before Naruto shot the towering man back into the sea wall and sending Joffrey out into the bay, a small blue trail of dust and smoke in their wake. Naruto was panting and stood hunched as blue wisps of energy began to flow off of his arms and legs. The boy's hair was covering his face from view, but to the younger pair present, he was having a hard time breathing. The septa finally snapped from her stupor and ran screaming for help. The Lannister guards and Baratheon guards had finally decided to leave their posts and see what the scuffle was about. Naruto shook his head, realizing that Joffrey probably had a hand in their delay. The boy was shaking as his body began to rise in temperature, almost as if his body was on fire all over. He felt his muscles burn and his bones ached to the point of shattering. His arms shook and his legs wobbled just as his consciousness waned. His balance was no different before his vision went black. All he could see was a small light at the end of his tunnel vision. He couldn't forget the image. It was so strange to him. It wasn't the 7-pointed star of the new gods, nor was it a weirwood tree of the old gods, but rather it was speaking to him, and the voice it held was deep and powerful. It was a heart. A red heart on fire. Time skip. A few more years had passed and now Naruto was at the good age of 4 and 10 while Joffrey annoyed people with his existence at the age of 6 and 10. The two hated each other at this point. Nothing was going to repair their relationship as brothers. Not only that, but it seemed that his parents supported the notion, or at least showed they didn't care in the slightest. Joffrey was always coddled by their mother, and Cersei obviously showed no care to Naruto. It would seem that Cersei hated Naruto as much as she hated Robert, but for some strange reason Naruto didn't care in the slightest. He fought through their combined glares and looks of disgust and disappointment and continued living for his little siblings. Searching for his father's praise always came up fruitless, so Naruto simply quit the endeavor, finally deciding that it was going to be a waste of time if he was going to care about opinions. He felt that his two uncles Jaime's and Tyrion's were the most important ones. If anything, they were like real family, and of course Myrcella and Tommen. With this rift forming between the royal family, Naruto was clearly feeling let down when he found out that Joffrey was riding north with them to Winterfell, a royal convoy all along the King's Road for the next month. Naruto smiled softly at the idea of being on the road and seeing the rest of Westeros. It would at least give him the freedom to see other things and people than the same red walls and the same blonde-haired, green-eyed people he called his family. So many thoughts rushed through his mind as he hitched his saddle to his horse. "You know there's a reason we have a stable boy." Jaime's voice came from behind. "You're a prince, nephew. You shouldn't be tying your own saddle." "I mean, Joffrey sure doesn't, uncle. You should know that I like to do things on my own," Naruto replied with a smirk. That stable boy couldn't strap belt around father's waist, much less a saddle, to a horse. In the stable boy's defense, no one can strap a belt around your father's waist, Jaime said with a thoughtful look. "What a strikingly good point that is," Naruto said with a bright smile, clearly trying to hold his laughter. "And why, thank you, sir Jaime, for your insightful insults towards my father." "Oh, please don't tell anyone," Jaime begged, sarcasm dripping from the corners of his lips. "I wouldn't want such a crime added to my list of wrongdoings." "Hello," another voice came along. The two blondes turned their heads towards the source, but once they turned their heads they found no one. Once more they continued their conversation, this time a bit quieter and resigned to snickering, but once again the voice came out, interrupting their small conversation. Footsteps echoed softly, and soon enough there was a cry of joy and the sloshing of liquid. "Well then, beloved brother and beloved nephew," Tyrion smiled, "what joy it is to find you two here. It's great to know he has a wineskin." Naruto smiled. "How are you, Uncle Tyrion?" "Oh, much better now." Tyrion smirked and waved his concern off. "You know, I was just recently in a woman and now my belly is full of wine with so much more left to fill." "Oh, little brother," Jaime sighed with a small laugh, leaving his lips. "Well, Tyrion, I got you your horse fitted with your special design, Naruto. You'll be fine riding alone." "Of course, Uncle Jaime," Naruto smiled. "I'll meet you at the gates, oh beloved nephew." Tyrion stopped before Jaime helped him up onto his horse. "Word of advice, please try and be courteous and respectful in the north, and most of all be wary of Joffrey. We're trusting you to keep him in line with that." Naruto's uncles left the scene. The boy gulped silently and rested his hand against his mount. Why his father allowed Joffrey to come Naruto never seemed to understand, but whatever the reason, he hoped that Joffrey wouldn't come to embarrass his family. Naruto slid his foot through the footrest and jumped over, sliding into place on the smooth leather seat. With a quick motion the horse took forward at a slow, manageable pace. Naruto stayed silent, letting the clomping hooves match his heavy heartbeat. He was thinking way too hard on this whole ordeal. If there was anything he was to worry about, it was his strange power growing within him. Naruto gripped the reins through his leather gloves. His power was strange and seemed almost infinite. The only problem was controlling it, since every time he used it he'd pass out, or the scar on his head would start to bleed. The boy sighed in despair. "There's always something that makes a perfect power not too powerful." Naruto leaned his head back. He didn't even know what to describe his power, as it clearly wasn't magic, or else runes and spells would have to have been made. This power was something else entirely, and it was healing him from wounds that he normally wouldn't have, and if he trained enough he could use the power in a fight to make his punches and kicks stronger, but that was as far as the possibilities could get. Oh, Naruto could remember the looks on the men's faces at what they'd seen. Some completely disregarded it as heat exhaustion. Some even went so far as to say that they were simply hallucinating and that the hound fell back and hit the rocks. Naruto couldn't help but take advantage of their disbelief, their almost unshakable disbelief. The boy lied through his teeth and kept the lie going until they told themselves that it was the truth. Naruto couldn't believe how easily swayed they were when they were up against something unbelievable. "Oh, Joffrey," Naruto thought the boy was so angry at him for hitting the hound like that. "I only told him to take Myrcella and Tommen out of the sand and back into the keep," Naruto thought, repeating what Joffrey said with a mocking tone. "Horse shit, but of course I did have to keep that giant of a man alive. After all, if I got kicked in the knee, I'd backhand the first person I see, but to see a man get his left hand removed is a sight I wasn't prepared for. At least Sandor took his punishment without any qualms. I can't help but feel a bit sorry for the man. Oh well, what can I do? The boy sighed and returned to his thoughts on his powers. If he ever strained and tried to access more of his powers, he would black out from pain and wake up in a cold sweat. What irked him though, whenever he'd knock out the dream world he's in is always the same. He's fighting with some black-haired boy wearing strange garb with an equally strange sword. The world around him was always on fire, and no matter what he or the nameless boy did, they would always lose to the woman, revealing her to have 3 eyes. Just before he'd wake from his sleep, Naruto couldn't take those dreams and simply stopped trying to test his limits with his powers. He didn't need those dreams. He didn't want those dreams. Suddenly he felt his collar get grabbed. Naruto pulled hard on the reins, stopping his horse, and finally returning to reality, he turned to see that it was Tyrion that stopped him. His uncles were talking about something, but Naruto rode past them with a steady, slow pace, but with a firm, thinking face on. The 2 Lannisters were curious about the boy's thoughts. Naruto smiled softly and conversed quietly enough for only their ears to receive his message. The 3 shared a laugh, and Tyrion even offered Naruto a sip from his wineskin. For some strange reason, Jaime looked appalled for once telling Tyrion to stop drinking and put his wineskin away. He's too young. Tyrion. Jaime smirked, trying to move past the awkward tone that set and let him have some normal fun before he dives into the pit that is Wino. But it's a pit he's going to crawl into at some point. At Tyrion smirked. What say you, Naruto? Are you willing to take a wonderful adventure filled with wine and women? Not entirely sure what you're asking, Uncle. Naruto replied with a sheepish look. He means getting drunk constantly and betting whores from every city in Westeros. Jaime whispered. It seems to be his own bastardized version of the normal coming-of-age ritual. Which is? Naruto asked with a raised brow. We take a ship to Essos and journey across the free cities. Jaime smiled, but that smile quickly dropped when Tyrion gave a small cough and took another heavy sip of his wine. Well, I never got to know what that was like. Tyrion frowned. Hopefully one day I will, though. Oh, Naruto held his tongue. He was about to ask why he never got to go, but the answer was painfully obvious for all to see. Tyrion was a dwarf. Naruto frowned. That was the only reason House Lannister, under the ruthless rule of Lord Tywin Lannister, thought of Tyrion as a failure, a joke, a lesson taught by the gods. Tywin hated Tyrion, and Naruto couldn't help but feel ashamed that his own grandfather thought like that. It was no matter. Tyrion seemed happy with his lot in life, drinking every day and betting horse left and right. Naruto for a moment stopped and thought about that lifestyle. Truthfully, there was nothing wrong with that idea, sleeping with women and drinking wine all the time, but that just wasn't the life for Naruto. I want to be a knight like father. Naruto paused. I mean Uncle Jaime. The ride north was rather uneventful, other than the occasional banditry that tried to attack them foolishly, so there was little to no excitement. But now that they were heading farther up north, the boy could feel the cold start piercing into his skin. Naruto could have sworn that it was still summer, though he clasped his hands together on his leather reins, feeling the cold drift underneath his open fleece cloak and build within his orange jerkin. Naruto, unlike his brother, embraced the orange coloring that came out of mixing the house colors of House Baratheon and House Lannister. Joffrey emblazoned the Lannister red with pride and showed very little, signifying his descent from House Baratheon. Naruto's eyes trailed around as they came towards the open gate of Winterfell, finding the ancient castle, arguably the oldest castle in all of Westeros, warm and feeling very much like a home rather than a castle. Once they filed into the courtyard, the Stark family standing at the head dropped to their knees with respectful bows to their king. All around, the Stark footmen and servants of the castle followed suit. The king dismounted, embarrassingly needing stairs to get off, and walked over to Lord Stark with a strange stiffness to his steps. You've gotten fat, Robert said suddenly. After almost 3 minutes of complete silence, no words were exchanged, but Lord Stark gave the king an incredulous look and eyed him up. People looked around awkwardly, but the king suddenly burst into laughter and embraced each other as the close friends they had grown to be. They had a little bit of small talk, and Robert was introduced to his children. Naruto looked at each of the children standing with Lord Stark. One was as tall as him, with a head of red curly hair, clearly taking after his mother, Lady Catelyn Stark. He looked strong, and once Naruto learned his name, it was clear that he was destined to be strong. He was a namesake for their king, Robert Baratheon. Naruto nodded at Robb Stark, and surprisingly Robb responded with a nod of his own. Naruto's blue Baratheon eyes trailed over and nearly shot from his head when he laid eyes on the next Stark child in line. He'd never seen someone like her before. In the south there weren't that many young redheads, but for him to see one in person, his heart began to pound in his chest. Her skin was pale and seemed as smooth as polished stone. Her hair, though, stood out amidst the dull and gray of the north, looking like a fire raging but calm. He wanted to say something, but he realized that her eyes weren't for him. It seems that Robb caught on that she was staring at someone and followed her trail. Naruto looked back and laid eyes upon his elder brother Joffrey and nearly felt the urge to punch him from his high horse. Joff had a small cheeky smirk that the boy was about to knock off. Joffrey suddenly had an air of superiority about him and even gave Sansa some knowing looks, to which she looked down in embarrassment. Naruto shook his head and dismounted his horse, with Jaime finally arriving with the rest of the Kingsguard. Naruto sighed and started leading his horse to wherever the stable. "Maybe let me take that for you, Prince Naruto," a voice said from behind. No thank you, I can handle it on my own." Naruto politely declined. "It seems you've already got a horse to put away. It appears to be your brother's," the boy replied with a frown. "That does seem like something Joff would do." Naruto frowned as well. "So you think you can show me where the stable is?" "Of course I can, follow me," the boy said with a smile. "By the way, my name is Jon Snow." Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. "Are you a bastard?" Jon asked with a glare. "I meant no insult by it." Jon Naruto quickly apologized. "Truly, oh well, Prince Naruto." Jon sighed. "Call me by my name, Naruto," the blonde said suddenly. "It's weird hearing all of this respectful talk to someone like me." "What do you mean by that?" Jon asked with a raised brow. "I don't like all of this serious talk," Naruto simply replied. "I don't know, it just feels weird to me." "Oh well, here we are at the stables." Jon smiled. "Just hitch your horse to wherever, since I doubt you have the stable boy do it for you." "Thank you, Jon." Naruto nodded his head. "I'll see you around, I guess." Naruto walked from the stables, wiping his gloves against his breeches. The boy started walking aimlessly, exploring Winterfell on his own. For some reason he felt a strange feeling in his heart. The longer he walked through the courtyard, some of the servants and guards bowed to him as he passed, and some even gave him full explanations of the different places within the castle walls. He turned on his heels once he arrived at the Godswood, though someone not believing in the old gods couldn't step foot in the Godswood, so with a sigh he walked back, smiling and waving at the people he came across, and even managed to set up a training match with someone on the morrow. After an insightful conversation with the Master-at-Arms Roderick Castle, Naruto kept walking, minding his own business, but bumped into someone. This person was clearly a child, since Naruto didn't even realize it until a voice made itself known. Naruto quickly turned and laid eyes on the second to youngest son of Lord Stark, Brandon. He had a head of light brown and auburn hair that clung to his head like a helmet. "Oh, I'm sorry, Bran, right?" Naruto bent down and helped the boy to his feet. "I didn't see you running there. It's now worry, Prince Naruto." Bran replied. "Head, just call me Naruto," the boy said. "So where are you running off to?" "Nowhere in particular," Bran said, obviously trying to hide something. "Doesn't seem like nowhere in particular," Naruto said questioningly. Bran looked left and right, almost as if he was trying to hide from someone next to his. A dog of sorts was wagging his tail excitedly, waiting for Bran to make a move. Naruto watched with a small smirk when Bran froze with a comic-style promise. "That you won't tell my lady mother," Bran said suddenly. "But I was going to climb the watchtowers on the western wall of Winterfell. Always did want to get a better view of the west." "Climb the towers?" Naruto asked with wide eyes. "That sounds dangerous." "Why do you think it's fun?" Bran asked with a sly smirk. "You know I like the way you think." Naruto smiled. "Would you mind if I joined you?" "Why, you climb too?" Bran asked with wide eyes. "Haha, gods no." Naruto scratched the back of his head with a sheepish grin. "I never once tried it. I was always afraid of falling." "Oh well, I'll see you at the feast," Naruto, Bran said, and took off through the courtyard, his wolf dog following close behind. "What an interesting bunch of people," Naruto sighed. "It's a breath of fresh air compared the liars and the cheats in King's Landing. They're so welcoming here. I like it." Naruto wrapped his fleece cloak around his body as he headed through courtyard. A cold wind whisked through. Despite the natural warmth the castle held, he was welcomed into the keep, and there he found people already getting prepared for the feast. Candles were already being placed into their chandelier placements, and the food was started to flow in on the large serving plates. The smells were intoxicating, each carrying him through the keep as if he'd stepped onto a floating cloud. He kept walking, though completely minding his business, and didn't even look where he was going. Suddenly, once again, he bumps into someone. He was beginning to wonder if this was going to be a normal thing here in the north. He looked down and nearly felt his skin run cold. In a beautiful dress, Sansa was sitting on her floor, her red locks of flowing hair splayed across her back, and he'd clearly been the one at fault. He reached down to help her up, but the girl didn't even look at him. She slapped his hand away and finally showed him a pair of the fiercest icy blue eyes he'd ever seen in his life. She was about to say something, but her open mouth dropped. Naruto almost burst into laughter when her rather pale face turned almost as red as her hair. "I'm so sorry, Prince Naruto." Sansa bowed her head. "I didn't know it was you." "It's okay, Sansa," Naruto reassured. "It was my fault that I bumped into you. Please, it's okay." "Are you sure?" Sansa asked meekly. "I wouldn't want to make you angry." "Nonsense," Naruto laughed. "If it were Joffrey you were talking to, he'd make you grovel and not even have the decency to apologize. You have no reason to fear me, my lady." Sansa stayed quiet, though, almost as if his presence scared her voice away. Her icy blue eyes trailed down to the floor beneath them and up to the walls around them, but not once did her eyes meet his, except for that one moment where she didn't know who he was. She fidgeted with her fingers, trying her best to say something to the young prince, but Nothing was coming out, but with the coming sound of a young girl's complaining, Sansa had never felt more relieved with Arya's presence than this time in her life. The little girl was getting pushed through the hallway by their septa. Naruto raised a brow at the little girl. She kept yelling about not being a lady and being a warrior. She kept declaring that she didn't look good in dresses and would prefer not to go to the feast at all. She fought and tried her best against the septa's strength, but to no avail. The little girl was, well, just that. Little Septa Mordain easily pushed Arya along and grabbed Sansa's sleeve along too, but before Sansa could disappear, Naruto turned to her and gave her a bright white smile. It was nice talking to you. Naruto waved. Nice talking to you. Naruto slammed his palm into his forehead. What kind of trash is that? Oh, I'm going to need something better to say the next time I see Sansa. He hunched his shoulders, a sigh of defeat escaping his lips, and headed through the feast hall and followed the stone halls back and forth exploring Winterfell. The boy kept walking and enjoyed the various tapestries of direwolves in the north displayed along the walls of the castle. It was unlike the Red Keep, where everything about the Targaryen dynasty was brutally put to torch and destroyed during the sack of King's Landing. It was a little heartbreaking to know that centuries of history were destroyed on such a horrible day, but enlightening to know that there are still families like the Starks that hold true to their ancient roots. Is a little shit, Naruto heard Jon say from down the hall. Is someone talking about Joffrey? Naruto asked, bursting through the door without even thinking. What makes you think we're talking about Joffrey? Naruto, Jon asked with a nervous look. It's because he is a little shit. Naruto laughed. Prince Naruto. Rob bowed his head. What are you doing here? Please just call me Naruto. Naruto sighed and, well, I was just journeying around the castle, since no one told me where to go after I tied my horse up in the stable. Well, we're just talking before the feast. Rob shrugged. Well, Naruto, if you don't mind, I'd want to know if you're really up for a sparring match in the training yard tomorrow. Of course I am. Naruto smiled. After a good night's rest, I'm ready for a good fight. To stretch my bones out sitting on a horse for many weeks is really strenuous. Understandable. Theon nodded. Would Joffrey join in on the fights? Yeah, Rob asked too. I want to beat him like the right little prick. He is right. You are again, Rob. Naruto smirked. Well, I can only hope he'll join in, but knowing him, he'll just make a scene and back out like the little girl he is. You know, Naruto. Rob laughed. You and I are going to be great friends in the future. I look forward to that day. Rob, the feast will begin in a few hours. Roderick Castle called out. Get into your fanciest clothes. The boys got up and headed out. After bidding each other goodbye, Rob and Theon took off fast. But Jon was a bit weary. He looked around nervously but headed off anyway. Naruto was just about to leave the room until Roderick Castle stopped Jon from leaving. The hurt in Jon's eyes was clear. He was a bastard, and apparently Lady Catelyn felt that he shouldn't be in there. Roderick Castle was clearly heavy-hearted by this, but he had orders and he was going to follow them. Jon's shoulders slouched and he walked back to his seat, collapsing down, with the weight of his pain holding him down. If only there was something I can do. Time skip. Naruto arrived in the feast hall dressed in a maroon leather jerkin with golden jewels draped along his neck and some even coming off of his shoulders. The way he dressed apparently wasn't enough to draw Sansa's gaze from Joffrey. The boy frowned and turned to look at the various people running amok, drinking from their tankards with reckless abandon. Men cheered and men feasted, showing a rather animalistic side to their appetites. Naruto smiled softly at the scene. It was peaceful, almost like a dream. The music calmed him slightly, and best of all, the food. He looked down to his full plate, stomach already rumbling. Roasted boar, salted beef, potatoes on the side with a few slices of barley bread. The boy could feel his saliva build at the corners of his mouth. He couldn't stand staring no longer and dug his utensils into the waiting meal. With each bite the meal got better and better tasting. The starch of the potatoes and the heat from the various spices the Northerners used in their meat. Naruto couldn't stop eating and ravaged through his plate until there was nothing left. Once he was done, he wiped his face with little composure. All eyes of the table were on him. With raised brows and dropped jaws, Naruto froze and realized that he was around strangers. For a moment he had enough dignity to look away with a blush of embarrassment on his face, but that dignity quickly fled once the laughter escaped his tablemates' mouths. The boy turned his head ready to say something, but Arya dug her spoon into her food and catapulted the blob at her sister, taking the initiative in the situation with utmost accuracy. The food hit Sansa's right eye, bringing a cry of despair from the red-headed girl. Once more the laughter exploded, but at least it wasn't pointed at him. Sansa looked embarrassed, her face growing almost as red as her hair. Naruto felt a small laugh leave him, but quickly stopped himself. He was trying to get the girl look at him, not disdain him. Lady Catelyn gave Rob a knowing look, and the boy stopped his hysterical laughter and quickly shuffled over, grabbing Arya from her seat. It wasn't long before they disappeared through the crowd. Sansa's friend had just finished wiping the food slop from her face. With no one in his way, he leaned over and tapped Sansa on her shoulder with a small grin on his face. He was a bit shaky and was trying to find the right words to start off with. When she turned to face him, he immediately lost what he was going To go with, he gulped and let out a meek hello. For some strange reason he couldn't find the strength to talk with her like a normal person. Sadly, or rather luckily, Naruto distinctly heard his mother calling to the red-headed girl, calling her little bird. Naruto frowned a bit, but quickly receded to his own chair, resting his forearms against the table. You know, Prince Naruto, you can get a second plate if you're hungry, Sansa's friend said suddenly. Oh, Naruto asked, who might you be? Oh, my name is Jane. Pull, my father is the steward of Winterfell, the girl replied with a small nod. My prince, well, thank you for telling me, Naruto piped. My prince, if I may ask you something, Jane said, stopping Naruto from leaving the table. Of course, anything, Naruto smiled. I wanted to know if you were besotted with my lady, Sansa, Jane asked. She was met with sudden silence though, and quickly regretted asking if I have offended. I'm sorry, my prince, no offense was taken, Naruto responded quickly enough to stop her from groveling. I truthfully don't know, my lady. Naruto stood from his seat once their conversation was over as he left to get more food. Sansa had just returned to her seat, making Naruto groan in despair. The boy shrugged though, finding the incessant growling of his stomach to be a more pressing matter. He walked through the crowd, dodging and weaving in between the people as they moved with a drunken sway in their steps. Naruto arrived at the table, holding the food, and nearly felt his saliva trickle from his mouth. Once more his hands were shaky and he hesitated from taking any more, seeing as there was practically no one else here taking food. Well, that was to be understood, seeing as everyone was drinking like madmen. Be careful, Naruto, I heard that roasted pork is a vile creature that'll eat you balls to brain, Rob said from behind. I don't know which to take first, Rob, Naruto said with an exasperated sigh. It all just looks so delicious. Then why don't you take all of it, Rob asked, giving Naruto a look that seemed like it was common knowledge. You're the prince, so who's going to stop you? You have a point, Naruto said with a thoughtful expression. I guess you're right. Naruto, easily faster than any man has ever moved, whisked a piece of every article of food. Rob watched with wide eyes, wondering what was wrong with the prince. He was clearly a strange one. Naruto though now had a wooden plate teeming to the brim with all kinds of meat and vegetables, along with a few slices of kidney pie. Next to the plate though were 2 tankards of wine. Naruto gave Rob a cheeky smile. Rob laughed and took one of the tankards before down the entire drink and handing Naruto the empty tankard with a cheeky grin. Oh, so a Stark can down wine better than me? Naruto asked. I'll have you know my uncle is Tyrion Lannister, the god of tits and wine. Naruto slammed his plate down on the table and lifted his own tankard, downing the drink considerably faster Then Rob had. Naruto gave the Stark a victorious smirk, clearly rubbing his meaningless victory in his face. Naruto poured wine into the 2 tankards, filling them to the rim, clearly overfilling them. Naruto raised one to Rob and the Stark took it without hesitation, drinking the tankard dry in less than a second, with Naruto already refilling his. At this point Rob's ego took a hold of him and he snatched the wineskin from Naruto and filled his before downing another. Hey, Lord Rob and Prince Naruto are having a drinking game, someone shouted. Stark versus Baratheon, come on, Rob. Rob heard Theon's voice call out, you can beat the prince, Ned. Robert called over the loud cheers and laughter. Look at our sons acting like we did back in the day. If I remember it was you who did all the drinking, Ned responded with a laugh of his own. Naruto took 2 tankards at once, drowning his mouth with wine. The teen slammed the 2 tankards down in victory and bellowed for another in a very Robert-esque way. Rob glared and continued drinking his tankards, following after Naruto, letting his anger get the best of him. Rob yelled for 3 tankards of wine, very out of character for his normally icy cold personality. Naruto laughed and ordered 4 more. Soon enough their orders arrived and they downed each one with no complaint and continued drinking, making the king rather proud. Even Ned burst into laughter. Naruto finished his 15th tankard and was starting to droop. Rob was finishing his 15th as well, already starting to sway. The 2 held onto the table for support, clearly losing their wits and their balance. Naruto slurred his speech and Rob finally dropped to his knees, drunk out of his mind. The Lannisters and Baratheons cheered with a thunderous roar as the young wolf fell first. Naruto flashed a small smile before collapsing as well, knocked out completely. Ned ordered some men to carry the 2 passed out boys to their rooms and the feast continued. That was quite a show, Caitlin smiled. Wouldn't you agree, Your Grace? I would say that. Cersei frowned. I never was able to control Naruto like Joffrey. Naruto took after his father more than what he'd like to admit. Oh, I'd agree, Caitlin sighed. Rob did take after his namesake, finding a liking towards wine men and their preferences. It seems Cersei frowned on the dais. An air of awkwardness followed between Lady Caitlin and the Queen. Cersei was clearly angry about something and her eyes never left the form of Robert. Cat followed the woman's gaze to the king and found the pudgy man feeling on another woman, clearly making plans to bed another behind his own wife's back. Caitlin took a deep breath and sighed softly. Things were quiet at the dais since Ned had left to speak with his brother in private. Her blue tully eyes looked down, finding her empty plate to be an interesting creation. Just hurry up and end. The next morning came a lot later than most would have hoped. Naruto awoke to a great pounding in his head, clearly starting To dig into his brain, Naruto frowned and pushed his body from the bed, sweat forming on his brow. For some reason the world around him was doubled, but before he could complain his vision reverted to normal. The boy took a deep breath and slid from his bed. Once his feet touched the floor his legs gave out, and it wasn't long before his face met the stone floor with a sloppy kiss. There was a moan that came from behind him, though. Naruto shot up to his feet and pressed his back against the stone walls. His eyes were wide with surprise. This voice scared him to sobriety. The woman turned in his bed, clearly still asleep. Naruto didn't recognize her, but she had a head of long brown hair and had a nice curvaceous body. The Baratheon rubbed his temples, clearly confused, but decided to let the girl rest. But it was then that he realized he was naked, and his cock hung loose. The boy's face ran hot with embarrassment. He rushed over to what seemed to be his clothes piled together on the far side of the room. Naruto rubbed his face in despair. He slept with a girl that he didn't know. He wasn't a virgin, far from it, but he was surprised that he'd done it so fast. He raised his leather jerkin, but the red was soiled by what seemed to be someone's dinner, and it reeked of wine and other scents. It was repulsive, and Naruto quickly dropped his jerkin in disgust, and went to throw on a simple tunic and slipped into his breeches with utmost silence. Well, at least at the best of his abilities, he quickly headed to the door and rested his hand on the handle, ready to ditch as fast as possible. But there was a hint of guilt in his chest when he looked back to the girl resting in bliss. He took a deep breath though and hightailed it from his room and shut the door behind him. He took off through the castle halls looking for someone he could talk to and ask what happened. He reeked of alcohol, and Naruto was starting to get sick of the scent he must be giving off. The boy came to a shuddering halt, feeling as if he'd forgotten something important. His blue eyes trailed left and right, looking through the empty halls, wondering why no one was awake yet. But then there was a sudden cold breeze that whisked into the hall and tickled his toes. It was then that he realized he'd once again forgotten boots. The boy took a deep breath and sighed in exasperation. The boy ran his hand against his tired and still sleepy face. He trudged through the stone halls and headed over towards Joffrey's room for a pair of his boots. The boy wasn't going to go back to his room until later today, when the girl in there was surely going to be gone. Naruto's face frowned deeper as he headed to Joffrey's room. He took a deep breath once he came upon it and knocked softly, still timid about seeking his elder brother out. When Joffrey didn't answer, Naruto knocked again, this time considerably louder. Still there was no answer. This time Naruto started banging on the boy's door, rapping his fist against the door, but in a moment of despair Naruto slid his hand against the doorknob and the door swung open. While Naruto frowned, "Don't I feel stupid?" Naruto walked into the room to find Joffrey's bed undone and some of his clothes gone along with his sword. He smirked softly and walked through the room, digging around through Joffrey's belongings, hoping to find an extra pair of boots. He sighed in relief when he found Joffrey's personal favorite. The pair was so perfect and fit to Naruto perfectly, better than it ever did with Joffrey. Naruto slipped his feet into the extra soft and smooth leather before placing his feet against the soft sole within the boot. Whoever designed this boot must have been a genius. The boy walked from the room and headed towards the Great Hall, expecting there to be breakfast awaiting the guests of the Stark household. Naruto arrived at the Great Hall and released a sigh of instant relief. There was food waiting, freshly baked bread along with sizzling bacon and charred venison jerky. The boy sighed softly and headed into the Great Hall, nodding to the various men and women sitting about enjoying their early morning feast. Thankfully his mother and father were nowhere to be found. Naruto smirked when he found an untouched plate of bacon and mashed potatoes. He looked at it for a few seconds, hoping no one was going to eat it. His hand reached forward and nearly touched the wooden plate. "Hey, Naruto!" A voice came from behind. Naruto shot his hand back and turned to face the newcomer. "Oh, nothing at all," Naruto said quickly. Oh, Rob smirked and walked past him, sitting down and taking the untouched plate. "If you want food, just ask one of the servants." "Oh, okay," Naruto said and took the seat opposite to Rob. "I see you're feeling sober." "Not really," Rob sighed. "I went too far last night." "Well, at least we're awake. Are you ready for the spar?" "Oh, I almost forgot about that." Naruto sighed. A plate was placed in front of Naruto by a pretty red-headed servant girl. She gave Naruto a small knowing look and headed off on her way. Naruto and Rob turned their heads following the girl as she walked off, swaying her hips slightly. Naruto turned to Rob and the two shared the same smile before continuing their breakfast. The boys ate in relative silence, aside from the two of them sharing a few jokes and having small talk here and there. Once their plates were finished, the red-headed servant walked by and took their plates, giving Naruto a small wink before disappearing into the kitchens. "I think she likes you," Rob smirked. "I think so too," Naruto whispered. "Oh, how could I forget what happened after I passed out? Honestly, I don't remember a thing after the 10th tankard." Rob laughed. "I heard that you pushed servants away and said that you could handle yourself." "Sounds like me," Naruto agreed. "Oh," Rob had a dangerous smirk. "Then I also heard that you were seen walking with a redhead towards your guest Chamber, does that sound like you too? I don't know what you're talking about. Naruto looked aghast. I don't even know how that happened. Apparently not. Rob struggled not to laugh. Now I wonder where John is. Good morning, John suddenly said and took a seat next to Rob, pulling his own plate in front of him. What are you two talking about? I heard about your little drinking game. Oh, Rob asked with a smirk. Think you can do better? I said no such thing, John quickly defended. Well, I heard Naruto disappeared with a redhead and wasn't seen all night. Damn it, Naruto sighed. I didn't think that I'd do something like that. You were apparently wrong, Rob replied. I guess so. Naruto frowned. But I can't remember a thing. I woke up and nearly screamed. Was last night you first time? Rob asked with an incredulous face. What? Naruto's eyes widened. And no, of course not. It's just that I wasn't expecting to sleep with anyone here. Well, that doesn't matter now, John sighed. Everyone's talking about it. I heard your father talking with mine, laughing on and on about it. Rob shook his head. If you don't mind me saying, your lord father is a bit of a strange one. I'm inclined to agree, Rob. Naruto shook his head and rested his fist against his cheek. What I'd give to have a father like your lord father, Rob. Prince Naruto. John Roderick Castle's voice echoed from behind the training circle. Is ready for the spar. Naruto stood from the table first and followed after the two men of the Stark household. The two shared a few talks and laughs, and they quickly turned to Naruto and included him almost as if he was their own brother. The three talked about menial things, and before long they were on the training field. Naruto's good feeling immediately disappeared when he looked over next to the stable and found Joffrey talking with Sandor and a few Lannister men at arms. They were clearly saying something insulting about the Starks or the North. Knowing Joff, though, Naruto knew that he was doing both. All right, who'll go first, sir? Roderick asked the two. Naruto and Rob quickly volunteered. The two shared a look and headed into the ring, drawing blunted training swords. Naruto rushed forward, taking the first swing at Rob's unguarded neck. Rob made a quick dodge, and Naruto's swing ended up going too far to the left. He made quick changes to his stance and dodged Rob's retaliation. You're fast, Rob praised. He lunged forward with a heavy quick strike. Naruto, though, shot his sword back around, parrying Rob's attack without thinking. Naruto shot his foot forward and kicked Rob out of the sparring ring, ending the fight before it could even begin. Rob rolled in the dirt before shooting to his feet. His icy eyes were wide. Never had he been beaten that fast. A smirk formed on Rob's face and nodded at the blonde prince. He shared a look with John and the snow side, drawing his own training sword. John took a stance and waited for Roderick to give the signal to begin. Roderick gave his nod, but before John could strike Naruto, Joffrey made his presence known. You know, if you want to show your true fighting skill, why don't you use live steel? Joffrey asked with a smug look. But your lordship might get. Roderick tried to reason. As your prince, I command that we use live steel. Joffrey smirked and drew his own sword. Joffrey, what are you doing? Naruto asked with a disapproving glare. Can't you see that we're having a simple duel? Draw your steel, Stark, Joffrey said, giving Rob a disapproving look. And you too, bastard, you'll have to do, since I don't see any other Starks to duel again. Naruto interrupted. What in seven hells are you doing? What? Joffrey gave his brother a feigned look of hurt. Two stags can't have a friendly duel with two wolves. Naruto gave an exasperated sigh but reached over and drew his own sword. John and Rob did the same. The three of them gave nervous looks to Sir Roderick, but the night permitted the fight. Naruto glared at Rob while Joffrey glared at John. Sir Roderick called out the signal and the four shot ahead. Naruto clashed his blade with Rob's steel against steel. The two brought their blades together in a cross before pushing off. Naruto jumped back while swinging out to block Rob's incoming quick lunges. If there was anything that Naruto could applaud about Rob's offense, he was exceptionally good at lunging at his enemies. Naruto twice felt the tip of the blade press against his tunic. The boy looked over to Joffrey, though, to see him already begging for mercy against John. Oh fuck me, Naruto growled. Joffrey back out the fight, nursing a small cut on his index finger. Rob and John tried their best from laughing and concentrated their efforts on the last stag in the fight. John shot ahead, his lunges wilder and less refined like Rob's. Naruto took advantage of his weakness and clashed his blade with John's, breaking his hold on it. For a moment he shot his foot forward and pushed John back, but it wasn't as strong as it was with Rob. Naruto brought his leg back when Rob took advantage of his outstretched limb. Ready to remove it, he spun around the ring, following the border, all the while trying his best to get behind the Stark. John picked up on what Naruto was doing, though, and shot his sword behind Rob, clashing his blade with Naruto's, bringing sparks to life. I've got you now, Rob boldly exclaimed, getting the attention of the small folk in the castle. As the two fought, people began to build up around them, watching them battle it out. From the roost above the training ground stood Robert and Ned, both watching with a calculating eye. Even Rob's uncle Benjen Stark of the Night's Watch was watching with curiosity. Among them, Jaime and Tyrion stood in awe of their battle. Ladies watched from the castle walkway, admiring their fighting moves. Rob swung down on Naruto, but he dug his body into the dirt below, rolling around, trying his best to avoid their blades. As he rolled in the dirt, he had a flash of dream and reality. For some reason his brown beaches had turned into a dark orange color of loose fitting pants and his boots disappeared to reveal black sandals. Shaking his head trying to remove the image from his head, Naruto continued the fight. Despite the strange sight, he let go of his sword and swung his legs around, bringing Rob to the dirt below, and raised his sword quick enough. Feeling his power building in his arms, John clashed his blade with Naruto's, bringing sparks in all directions. John was clearly stronger than he let on, and Naruto was beginning to struggle against his power. His eyes widened in fear when Rob rose to his feet, his blade ready. "Fuck it," Naruto cried. He placed his hand on his blade and forced his body over, shooting John's blade from his own, and managed to dodge Rob's strike at the cost of his palm. John's guard was broken and Naruto shot forward, head-butting him back with John hunching over, gripping his aching gut. Naruto turned to face Rob, immediately swinging for the Stark's neck. Rob smirked and continued to block Naruto's attacks, each one coming close to striking him. Naruto changed strategy and went back on the defensive and kicked John in the leg, bringing him to the dirt below, gripping his knee. Rob's eyes narrowed, bringing his arm back for an overhead swing that is the easiest to block. Naruto thought, "Shit, my power is starting to build again. I need to release." Time began to slow as Naruto's blue eyes darkened in color. He shot his arm forward, and near invisible blue mist flowing off of his arm. As he shot his blade forward, he could tell that John was already back on his feet, ready to strike, but Naruto had other plans. Rob's sword was closing in and John's was too. He had to move fast. Clang! The entire courtyard was silent. Joffrey's jaw dropped in complete surprise. Those in the roost were completely silent with disbelief in their eyes. Ned's jaw was lax and Robert's face had never been so filled with utter shock. Jaime's eyes were as wide as plates and Tyrion couldn't help but keep smiling at the sight. Men were shut quiet, women gasped, and children felt their jaws hit the ground. Lannister men-at-arms and Stark levies were awestruck. Naruto stood between Rob and John, his sword pointed at John's gut while Rob's sword was split in half. Naruto's hair was wild and loose, covering his eyes from view. John was frozen in place and Rob couldn't help but feel the same. Naruto was breathing hard but kept his stance. These two had lost and he was going to stay this way until someone called the fight. He gritted his teeth as no one was going to say anything that was amazing. Sansa called, suddenly screamed. Naruto's eyes widened with pride. Naruto straightened up and carelessly removed his sword from John's gut. Rob roared a command and John tacked Naruto to the ground and rolled him over onto the dirt. John punched Naruto in the chest, breaking his guard. John tossed Rob his sword and stepped out of the ring to sit the rest of the fight out. People were roaring and cheering for the two boys with a thunderous applause. Rob paced around Naruto with a victorious smirk on his face. "Come on, Naruto," Rob said with a smile. "The fight's not over yet. I'll get you back for doing that to my sword." "Oh, please do," Naruto chided. "I'm waiting to see what the young wolf has to offer." Rob shot forward and swung down on Naruto. Naruto laughed and sped over, dodging Rob's charging form, and wrapped his feet around Rob's left foot, breaking his balance, bringing him down to the ground as well. Rob crashed through the dirt and slid close to the borderline, nearly crossing over. He growled and kicked Naruto away. As Naruto ready to go in for an overhead strike, Naruto stumbled and tried to regain his balance in the attack. Naruto lost his grip on his sword while Rob rushed him. Naruto looked down to his sword and back to Rob as time began to slow down once more. "All right, let's see how well you do with all sorts of weapons," Naruto roared. People began to scream out, cheering almost as if this was some sort of tourney. Naruto shot his hand down and drew out his dagger just in time to dodge Rob's sword by just a hair. The blonde brought his dagger up and slid his blade against Rob's, drawing bright sparks in its wake. People cringed at the sound, but Rob was undeterred. Once the dagger was resting against the crossguard, Naruto shot his fist around, punching Rob in his gut. The Stark pulled back, realizing that using a sword against him was probably not going to be a good idea. He tossed John's broadsword back to the boy. "Give him hell," John smirked. "I plan to." Rob drew out his own dagger and get down into a stance. "I'll have you know that I'm better with a dagger than a sword. I'll be the judge of that." Rob Naruto lunged forward, clearly matching the speed. Rob had the Stark caught Naruto's attack at the right moment and danced his blade around Naruto's dagger before punching Naruto with his free hand. Naruto backed away, ducking under a quick swing from Rob. Naruto aimed for Rob's knee, but he jumped back in time, ready to lunge down on the crouching Baratheon. Rob shot down, ready to force Naruto into submission, but the blonde was as evasive as ever and rolled through the snow, bringing Rob to dig his blade into the dirt. The two were so evenly matched the entire castle was gripped with an awe-stricken admiration. Naruto aimed to dig his blade into Rob's neck while Rob intended to do the same. Neither were going to give up, but Sir Roderick had enough and was beginning to worry about the two. He called the match, stating it to be a tie, but the two were moving too fast to stop now. Sansa's hands shot to her face as a gasp escaped her lips. Jaime nearly jumped off the roost to help his nephew, but sighed in desperate relief at what he saw. Naruto pressed his dagger against Rob's throat while Rob's left hand held the blade back, and Rob's blade was at Naruto's left kidney, but just like Rob, Naruto's left hand was holding Rob back. Naruto's smirk was definite, and Rob's look of victory was no different. They pulled back from one another and sheathed their weapons. All around they finally took notice of the crowd they'd gathered. Everyone was cheering, screaming their names. Naruto looked up and nearly fainted. His father, the man who'd showed very little care in his life, was actually smiling and giving him a look of approval. Naruto smiled brightly, causing a louder squeal from the ladies watching from the walkway. Rob wrapped his arm around Naruto and waved at the people as they continued to chant their names. Naruto did the same and joined in, reveling in the fame. Naruto, though, trailed his eyes over to the walkway and saw Sansa smiling at him, all the while clapping her hands. "I see that you've caught the eye of my sister," Rob whispered. "I'd be more pressed to believe it the other way around," Naruto replied with a smirk. Naruto walked from the castle after changing into new clothes. After all, his tunic and his breeches were covered in dirt and mud. He smirked back to the spar and found that he and Rob had grown to form a tight warrior's bond. He walked back into the courtyard, immediately becoming the subject of gaze for various ladies around the castle. Some were poor small folk, but others were high-born ladies with beautiful bodies. Some had heads of deep black hair and others had heads of light brown hair. He smiled softly at each one as he passed them by, clearly eyeing them up. As he walked on, he had nothing to do now since his spar with Rob was over and simply went on another journey through the castle's courtyard. He saw Baratheon men-at-arms talking with Stark levies and Lannister footmen, all in the same group, without breaking into fights. He was glad that nothing ridiculous was happening since his spar with Rob, but just before he came to believe he had nothing left to do, there was a small blur of black and brown, followed by a small blur of black and brown as blue Baratheon eyes trailed over, following the trail of Bran and his direwolf. "I wonder where he's off to," Naruto smirked. He stayed quiet and away from Bran's possible peripheral. The boy was quick, but he was clumsy and nowhere near agile. He was a pretty easy target to stalk. Once Naruto realized his pattern, the blonde came to a halt. Once Bran came to a large wall covered in vines and moss. It was old and ruined, but Naruto noticed various footholds jutting from parts of the wall. It seemed like a serviceable ladder for someone who wanted to climb, but for some reason Naruto felt that for someone like Bran, who climbs all the time, this was child's play. But Bran climbed anyway. For someone that he assumed was clumsy, Bran was definitely sure-footed on the wall, holding on with expert balance and strength. Rising higher and higher onto the wall, Bran struggled for a moment to find his next foothold, but in a daring action the boy jumped up and gripped onto an empty socket in the wall, nearly scaring Naruto from his hiding spot. Bran, though, pulled his lithe body up and rested his feet against another outcropping of loose stone. Bran didn't stop there, though. He turned to his left and jumped, keeping his body against the wall, and against all odds he landed on the next outcropping, keeping his balance from before. As of now, Naruto assumed that the boy was about 80 feet into the air, nearly to the top of the wall. The higher Bran got, the more terrified Naruto became. Watching Bran do these daring jumps and near misses made Naruto's heart race in excitement. For a moment Naruto felt that he was going to join Bran in his next climb, no matter how high the climb may be. He was deeply impressed with Bran's abilities. The Stark climbed to the top of the wall and wiped his hands on his breeches, seeming to take a deep breath and sighing, "Wonderful performance, Bran," Naruto called out, giving the Stark a slow clap. As he descended, "I'm madly impressed. I didn't think you were serious about climbing." "Of course I am," Bran called back, jogging up to the prince. "You won't tell my lady mother, right?" "Bah, of course not," Naruto laughed. "I actually want to join you in your next climb." "What?" Bran asked with wide eyes. "I thought you were afraid of falling." "Rubbish," Naruto waved his hand. "I can't let a boy of 10 years climb walls better than I have. You at least climbed a wall before?" Bran asked with a worried expression. "I was planning on warming up on the eastern wall and again on the western wall before going to taller buildings." "That sounds good to me," Naruto smiled. "Lead the way." "This is ridiculous." Naruto shut his eyes, tightly gripping onto the wall for dear life. "How in seven hells can you climb so easily? You're barely 3 feet off the ground." "Naruto," Bran said, a laugh escaping from his lips. "You're terrible at this. You know what?" Naruto glared at the boy. "I'll prove you wrong." Naruto channeled a small portion of his powers to his fingers, and immediately he showed a strength that he didn't have before. He pulled his entire body up with just his fingers and continued to move along, getting higher and higher on the eastern wall. Bran was smiling, cheering Naruto's name softly, of course, so as to not bring the attention of his mother. Naruto was about to make it up the side of the wall, but his power ran dry and immediately his fingers lost their strength. He slipped back, his hands beginning to cramp. Bran's body ran cold as Naruto began to fall. The blonde screamed suddenly and shot his hands against the wall and grabbed onto the first thing he could. His palm rested against a jutting stone, and his fingers lazily rested against the stone. At first he thought he was going to pry it from its socket, but the stone stayed its place. Naruto took a deep breath and flashed Bran a reassuring smile and used all the strength he could muster, bringing his entire body up against the wall, almost kissing it. Following after Bran's example, he brought his legs against the wall as well, raising his feet to rest on the outcropping. Naruto had never been so terrified in his life. He was easily 70 feet off the ground, watching an ant-sized Bran giving him a signal to continue. Naruto's heart raced to speeds unknown as his hand rubbed against the wall, searching for another stone outcropping. He was desperate. Sweat was pouring down his face. He shot his hand out in desperation, but his hand slapped back against the stone, causing his balance to disappear. Bran once again froze. This time there was no saving Naruto. The blonde fell from the wall, waving his hands around, begging for someone to catch him. No one came, and Bran was too small anyway. Naruto shot his forearms to cover his face as the ground came closing in rather quickly. He expected pain, or at least something to dig into his skin, but he felt nothing. All he knew was that everything was as dark as night, but it was clearly morning. He opened his eyes and found that he was within the castle, a towel on his head and wrapped in bed furs. Maester Lewin was standing next to him, treating his arm wounds with healing herbs. On the other side of the bed was a sheepish Bran and a distraught Lady Stark. Naruto was surprised that his own mother hadn't come to see him, but took it anyway. He turned to Lady Caitlyn and flashed her a small smile. Bran stepped forward though and kept looking down at his feet, trying to avoid Naruto's gaze. "I'm sorry, Naruto, for convincing you to climb," Bran said with a small tone. "Eyes never coming up to look at the prince." Bran looked the prince in the eye and tell him that Lady Caitlyn chided, "Show some respect to the boy. You almost got killed." "Lady Stark, if I may," Naruto interrupted. My prince." Cat nodded her head. "I was the one that convinced Bran to let me join in on his climbing exploits." Naruto sighed. "It was interesting to me, and no one in the south does things like that. I wanted to give it a try." "Is all well? You're lucky." Naruto. Maester Lewin sighed. "No permanent damage to your body other than a few cuts and bruises on your forearms and elbow. You'll be fine." "Well, Prince Naruto, I see that you've grown fond among my children," Caitlyn said as Maester Lewin pulled Bran away from the room. "They are the kind of people that I want to be friends with." Naruto smiled. "It also helps that they decided to open up to me. You've grown exceptionally close to my eldest Rob." Caitlyn smiled, reminding me of how my lord husband was with your lord father when they were but squires in the Vale. It seems that some friendships transcend generations, but I am begging you, Prince Naruto." Caitlyn suddenly changed moods. "Don't even climb with Bran again, and if you can stop him, do so. You falling and hurting yourself only solidifies my fears that my son could do the same. Sure-footed or not, I'll do what I can." Lady Stark. Naruto frowned and nodded his head. "Thank you, Prince Naruto." Caitlyn smiled. "Have a good rest." Naruto sat in silence. He groaned after sitting in his bed for almost 3 minutes with nothing to do, thinking back to Maester Lewin. The Maester never once said anything about having to stay in bed. Naruto smirked and jumped the bed, stretched his legs and stretched his bruised arms. He was going to go out into the courtyard again and find Bran to stop him from doing something that both of them would regret in the future. He walked through the halls and immediately checked his feet, sighing in relief when he saw boots wrapped around his feet. He nodded at the various Stark levies that stood at each hall and strode through the castle on the search for Bran. Knowing the boy, he decided to run off with his nameless direwolf. He exited the keep and walked through the courtyard, once again passing the various shops on his search for Bran. Naruto smirked when he saw a little black figure clinging to a large and seemingly run-down tower on the far side of the castle. Naruto rushed over to the tower with utmost importance, blowing past various people wanting to congratulate him on his battle with Rob. He slid against the dirt and spotted Bran's direwolf waiting with his tail wagging. The wolf sat with its tongue hanging from its open mouth. Naruto smirked and saw that Bran was barely even a quarter up the tower, clearly having just begun his climb. Naruto bellowed out to the boy, forcing Bran to look at him with wide eyes. The boy frowned and started to climb down, releasing his grip on the wall, and fell at least 8 feet before slamming his booted feet on the ground below. In a graceful fashion, "Bran, your mother said no more climbing," Naruto warned. "I guess I'll have to leave then." Bran frowned. "Under normal circumstances I would make you go back, but I'm thinking of climbing this tower myself." Naruto smiled. "I watched you climb the wall for a few minutes and I've managed to piece together a basic idea of how to do it. This'll be the last time we climb while I'm here, understood? But as your prince I commanded." Bran Naruto said sternly, "I'm trying to do us both a favor." "Well, here goes nothing, just remember to keep your feet together and steady." Naruto. Bran advised. "I don't want your injury on my head." "Oh, it won't be." Naruto gave him a cheeky smile while setting his feet in the right position. "Besides, I was dying to challenge myself to do better than trying to embarrassingly climb a wall and fail. That's just how I like to improve." Naruto wrapped his hand on the protruding stone and rested his foot against another, fastening his position against the wall with a stiff connection, or raised his hands up and latched onto another outcropping of stone. Bran jumped slightly when Naruto's left foot lost its placement and slid off of its stone. The prince, though, quickly rectified his mistake, bringing his left and right foot together, placing the right side of his feet against the wall. The boy turned around and rested his back on the stone again, already breathing hard. "There's an open area of loose stone for you to grab onto," Bran called from below. "You're going to have to jump though. You think you can handle it?" "Of course." Naruto looked up, tuning his eyes to the target at hand. Shutting his Baratheon eyes, he bent his knees and shot up towards the air, raising his hands ready to catch on. Bran held his breath and held his hands to his face. Naruto wasn't going to make it. Bran started turning jittery and ran to the tower, ready to start climbing as well, until Naruto's voice sounded from above saying he made it. Bran was in disbelief and backed away, to see the blonde prince dangling from the hole. For dear life, Naruto was taking steady breaths this time and began to swing his body softly against the wall and shot his hands up, gripping onto another part of the hole, strengthening his grip. A beaming smile formed on his face and he pulled his rigid body higher and higher, finding the climb easier and easier as he ascended. Naruto called from the top of the tower, "I'm going to take the stairs down, I'll see you there." Bran flashed Naruto a thumbs up and waited against another old wall with his dire wolf eagerly waiting Naruto's return. Naruto stepped his foot into the tower and eased his body in, but he was quickly grabbed by the collar of his tunic and a knife was placed at his throat. His eyes were wide with fear. "Naruto, you Uncle Jamie." Naruto's face went cold. "I couldn't tell that it was you talking." Jamie's face was devoid of color. "What in blazes are you doing up here?" Naruto was confused. Why was his uncle up here alone? But after a shuffle was heard in the far side of the tower roost, someone appeared from behind the rubble of the fallen tower roof. His jaw fell loose as the image of his mother came to form in front of him. Her dress was being held by her hands to cover her chest, and Jamie was clearly missing some articles of clothing. It didn't take long for Naruto to realize what the two were doing. What's going on?" Naruto managed to get out. His voice was long gone and his pulse was non-existent. Jamie and Cersei looked at him with fearful eyes. Naruto gripped the floor wrapped around the tower window for dear life, already expecting something to happen. Cersei looked to Jamie and Jamie looked to her, neither of them saying a word, clearly contemplating what to do with the situation. Naruto stayed as silent as possible, trying to quell the anger and the disgust writhing within him. Naruto's face dropped when he saw a silver tear fall from Cersei's eyes. "He saw us, Jamie." Cersei finally said, her voice as hard as steel. "You shouldn't care about him, he's not your child." "Uncle Jamie?" Naruto asked with wide eyes. "I'm sorry." Before he knew it, Jamie had placed his palm on Naruto's chest and pushed with all his might. Naruto's eyes filled with hurt and betrayal as he descended. The prince swung his arms about wildly, hoping to all the gods old and knew that something would appear for him to grab on. He begged and begged, but his life simply flashed in front of him as the ground readied itself for his arrival. As he fell, though, images began to flash in his mind. The tower in front of him faded and the cold lands of the north was replaced with heat and burning lava below. He saw them falling with him. The heat had him trying to fly away for safety, but these people called out to him, screaming his name for help, but for some reason he couldn't recognize them. One had a head of silver hair, another had a head of short pink hair, and the last, the most familiar one, a head of jet black hair, was what he had. They fell together towards the pit of lava, and there seemed to be nothing they could do. Gravity was pulling them closer, and soon enough Naruto watched the first two become engulfed in the vast expanse of the ocean of molten rock. The looks of agonizing pain was the last he saw of them before their bodies sank beneath the fiery surface. "Fuck me," Naruto sighed as the lava rushed to meet him. Naruto shot from his covers in a dead sweat. His hair was thick, sticking against his skin. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. His breath was ragged and labored. He was warm and wrapped in the loose embrace of bed furs and was rather comfortable. He didn't take in his surroundings yet, but kept trying to contain and control his breaths. His body was shaking and trembling. His body was warm, not melting. He needed to remind himself that his legs were still in working order, as he could feel his toes, and he saw his legs move beneath the furs, and his arms were rather unscathed despite the bruises and scars already on them. He looked around finally, realizing that Sansa, Rob, John and Bran were sitting in stools watching with worried eyes. Tommen and Marcella were at the foot of the bed wiping tears from their faces. Cersei was nowhere to be found, but Jamie stood in the doorway watching with worry on his face. Robert was looking at Naruto with a worried look that the Baratheon scion had never seen before. Caitlyn and Ned watched the boy with sad eyes and kept to the back of the room. "What happened, Naruto?" Robert shouted. "Tell us who pushed you from the tower." Naruto asked with an estranged look on his face. "I wasn't in a tower." "What are you talking about?" Rob asked with a glare. "Ask Bran." Naruto threw up his hands in a quick defense. "The pain already gone. Me and Bran were climbing a wall. I lost balance and I fell." "But you climbed the tower, Naruto," Bran said with wide eyes. "We carried your body from the base of the tower to the keep." "I don't remember being at any tower," Naruto responded with a glare. "I have no idea what you're talking about."